Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So the final item today is we're circling back to Nextdoor, which released its earnings. Was it this week? It feels like.
I think it was this week.
Yeah, I was going to say it was last week, but it's just so much is going on.
Yeah.
So Nextdoor released its first formal earnings after their SPAC IPO, and there were a number of interesting findings in there, David, that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, just the first was, well, first of all, they reported the quarterly revenue was up 48% year over year, which is impressive, I guess, from any measure. The flip side of that is the revenue was only 59 million. And I, just in terms of the level of interest that Nextdoor seems to have in the local SaaS community, I expected a B on the front of it for whatever reason. And so I went and did a little bit of quick math. It's essentially 1/1300th of Alphabet's quarterly revenue and 1/600th of Meta's quarterly revenue and something like 1/200th of Twitter's quarterly revenue. And I think it just shows that Nextdoor has a very, very, very long way to go from a revenue standpoint. I know that they just started on monetizing not that long ago. But then the other side of that is that their weekly active user count was only 36 million, which struck me as a very low number and not something that is all that monetizable just generally. And so I think that Nextdoor still has a unique place in the market. I think that they could be executing much better from a product standpoint as a consumer, and certainly from a product standpoint as an advertising platform or as a customer acquisition tool for businesses. But I don't know that they're going to be this sort of local replacement for Facebook that a lot of people had predicted, and I may even have predicted it historically. I was pretty excited for Nextdoor in sort of the mid-teens, and increasingly the longer I stayed on the platform as a user, it just evolved into a bunch of conversations from really annoying people. And in many cases, these annoying people were Nextdoor's sort of self-anointed Nextdoor elite, self-appointed Nextdoor elite that they had chosen as like community managers. So I think it's I'm still rooting for anybody to come along and provide an alternative to Facebook and Google at the local level. But I'm increasingly pessimistic that it's going to be Nextdoor. I think they run into the same content moderation problems that all of these major players do, and they have nowhere close to the scale to either deal with the moderation issues or to leverage their base of users for advertising or customer acquisition purposes. So it was an interesting report. They're clearly, they're growing at still a pretty reasonable rate, but they have a long way to go, and I'm just not sure that they're ever going to get there. So,
well, the user, the active it's monthly active users, I think, or
they said weekly active users.
Okay, so weekly
36
active,
million. Yeah.
Right. So that's important. Obviously, the more. So weekly sort of splits the baby between daily and monthly, which is what Facebook uses, but. Considering that they've been around since 2010, that's a low number. I mean, we're 12 years in, and that's a low number for them. And I think, as you point out, some of the issues are cultural issues, meaning the culture that exists on Nextdoor. They're trying to transition from a kind of neighborhood watch culture to one where people trade word of mouth recommendations and otherwise engage with one another. And they've had a lot of difficulty doing that. Another point I would make is that they are going to rely on self-service advertising by small businesses to generate a lot of revenue growth, which I think is a dicey proposition for anybody that wants to do that. They will have to make it, incredibly simple, which they're trying to do. But I think that that's going to be really challenging.
Yeah, and from the business standpoint in particular, as a user, I don't know what the business side looks like, but as a user, it's incredibly difficult to see what conversations are happening anywhere outside of your zip code, right? So even though
they're trying to expand that.
I'm adjacent to 3 or 4 different neighborhoods in where I live in Portland, where I want to know what was going on because it's a mile bike ride or whatever. it's very, very hard to sort of get involved in those conversations. And certainly for businesses, their customer radius is a lot wider than the default radius that Nextdoor sets as a user. So it could be just a problem with the way the product is constructed sort of architecturally.
I think they're trying to address that. They have the chief product officers from LinkedIn, and I think there's a number of strategies that they're going to implement that will broaden out the networks. They're trying to expand people's communities. Mike, did you want to say anything about Nextdoor?
How's Nextdoor Olean doing these days?
Actually, recently I've gotten several invitations to join. I am of the sort of Groucho Marx belief that I'm not sure I want to be a member of any club that would have me as a member. So I've resisted. It's like one more thing one has to do. So I have not. And I live way out in the country, so I don't have to interact with my neighbors. And I then avoid these kinds of disappointments. So it's not for me.
Well, one quick point that goes back to the reviews discussion at the beginning. You can get local business recommendations on Nextdoor that are it's an alternative source, and they are often pretty good. It is a place that I go to look for people. And in one case, there was a carpenter that I found, a guy to build fences and other stuff out of wood. And he said that somebody had recommended him on Nextdoor, and he was overwhelmed by like 90 inbound leads, kind of organic leads. So they are able to deliver some real value for small businesses. But I agree with you. It's challenging right now to sort of get at that information. But that's an opportunity for them that hasn't been fully exploited. So I think with that we're all out of time this week. Unfortunately, we have more we could go into, but as always, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.